Kevin Feige, the president, is here. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. Hello, sir.
Hi. San Diego Comic-Con with the man himself, Kevin Feige.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Feige and Throw the Lighter.
Help me welcome to the stage, President of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige!
Everybody, hello, Hall H.
Now, I could spend 90 minutes talking about what we've done, or I could spend some time talking about what we're about to do.
Kevin Feige is perhaps the most successful and well-known movie producer of the modern day. Through his work at Marvel Studios, Feige has built the biggest and most profitable cinematic universe in history. Producing 33 films and a handful of shows over 15 years has helped Feige generate over $29 billion in box office sales, whilst managing to keep fans invested and excited from project to project. In the eyes of both the global fanbase and corporate executives, Feige was the man.
The man, the myth, the legend, Kevin Feige.
So happy to be standing here with Kevin Feige.
Your hat is amazing.
We are here with the Sorcerer Supreme of the MCU himself, Kevin Feige. Welcome, welcome.
Everybody, how are you?
We are great.
So with all that being said, why has Feige let the MCU go to absolute shit? Now, let's be real. No one can deny that Kevin Feige hasn't done a fantastic job, at least in the past. I'm referring specifically to the Infinity Saga. Feige produced 23 films over a 12-year period, which in itself is impressive. But more importantly, these films focused on character-driven stories with intertwining plot lines, all while simultaneously building a universe full of characters that audiences grew to love, in a feat that would have once seemed like an impossible task. Let me take you back to a simpler time, perhaps one of my fondest memories as a fan of the MCU. It was 2019. Avengers Endgame was due to release in a couple of months. The Super Bowl trailer had just dropped and the hype was real. Most people, even those you didn't think could care about the MCU, were talking and theorizing about what they thought was going to happen. You couldn't escape it online either. There were so many plot leaks you had to tread carefully. You wanted to know if your favourite characters were going to come back after being dusted. You were worried for the characters who were still alive because you knew that not all of them were going to make it. First and foremost, you gave a shit, bigger than any other shit you've given before, and you thanked Kevin Feige for his brilliance, his genius, in building this world and these characters that you loved. The level of excitement and anticipation was something you'd never felt before, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of people, almost everyone, when I say that nothing has even come close to that feeling since. Flash forward to the present. The latest theatrical release in the MCU is The Marvels. You want to neck yourself.
Don't try to stop me.
Now don't get me wrong, not every film in the Infinity Saga was an absolute banger. If I'm being honest, I would even argue that most of those films aren't even good to great. But they are still clear of the depressing sludge that Marvel is producing in this multiverse saga. And yes, you could argue that we haven't let this saga run its course and given it the chance to build the hype for a team-up film like that of Infinity War or Endgame. But if you really sat down and were honest with yourself, if there were a film of that level on the horizon, would you even care? Are there any characters left that are worth rooting for? In this new saga, the main problem is quite obviously the writing. It's not the acting, the cinematography, or even the visual effects. The writing is so weak, so void of effort, and so ridiculous at times that it's almost impossible to have any level of investment. To examine this a little further, let's take a look at the main antagonist in each of these phases. Starting with Thanos, the man himself had a few cameos here and there in the first Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Age of Ultron. And for the most part, throughout the entire saga until Infinity War, he remained a bit of a mystery. We knew he was after the Infinity Stones, but we didn't know why and what for. Due to the mystery and the fact that he was using pawns like that of Loki and Ronan the Accuser, it was clear he was powerful, had a lot of influence, and was a force to be reckoned with. And this became all the more clear in the opening minutes of Infinity War, laying waste to the Asgardians, killing both Heimdall and Loki, and making a mockery of the Hulk before we even had time to process what we were witnessing. This guy was an all-powerful threat, someone to be feared, and at that point only had 2 of the Infinity Stones. We then learn of his character motivation throughout the film, having to make tough personal choices to complete his mission, all in an effort for what he believed was the greater good. The writers did a superb job at fleshing him out, giving him a purpose and making the audience fear for their favourite characters due to his insane power level and inability to be reasoned with. In comparison, the main antagonist of the multiverse saga is Kang the Conqueror. Rather than cameos, we've seen different variants in Loki Season 1 and 2, as well as in Quantumania. And rather than actually accomplishing anything overly threatening, our protagonists are just written to fear him.
It's him. What? You made him sound like this terrifying figure.
Don't be shocked
He is.
when I tell you.
Like seriously, why would anyone, especially Loki, be scared of this guy? He's nothing more than a clown, a blubbering con man, a rambling lunatic who was just keen for a nap.
Why would you give up being in control?
Buddy, I'm tired.
To even compare him to Thanos is an embarrassment, not to mention the fact that his character motivation couldn't be more confusing, especially when there are so many different variants with different motives. One of them claims to be saving the multiverse, another wants to conquer all other variants and timelines, and then one of them is just a harmless bloke who gets dragged into this mess and inadvertently meets an unimaginable fate. Are we possibly supposed to follow and understand any of this? Which one is the main threat? What is even happening? It's becoming more and more clear with every project released that there is no through line, no well-defined path in which Feige wants to take this saga with Kang as the main antagonist. With Thanos, there was a clear storyline set in place, and we knew where we were headed. He wanted the Infinity Stones, and he was going to do whatever it took to get them. He bided his time until he had no choice but to find them himself. This multiverse plotline with Kang, though, is all over the place and so hard to follow. To make matters worse, that's only one of many reasons why the MCU is in complete shambles. Not only are there no longer any likable characters left, with most fan favourites either retiring, dying, or just being completely character assassinated beyond repair, but everything being released is so forgettable and almost unwatchable at times. Projects like Multiverse of Madness, Secret Invasion, and Love and Thunder have achieved nothing beyond damaging once beloved characters, either making them ridiculously incompetent, reducing them to a joke, or just completely changing their backstory. To double down, the new characters that have been introduced to replace the old just don't have the magic or the appeal, the charisma or the complexity, the flaws or the character development for audiences to actually give a shit. With such bland, lazy writing, how can you expect anyone to actually care? Just look at the Marvel banner on Disney+. With this abysmal cast of characters leading us into the future, there is truly no hope left. The MCU is as good as dead. And this catastrophic fall from grace just leaves me wondering, Feige, what is going on? Unfortunately, we can't put the blame on Feige just yet without fully understanding the part he plays as the president of Marvel Studios. Starting out as an associate producer at Marvel in 2000 on the first X-Men film, Feige rose through the ranks to become the president of Marvel Studios in 2007, from which he began making the cinematic universe he envisioned a reality. Going through his filmography, Feige is listed as a producer of some sort on basically every single Marvel production in the MCU. But what does that mean exactly? Basically, Kevin Feige is like what Nick Fury is to S.H.I.E.L.D. He assembles the team, plans the missions, checks in constantly, and gets involved himself if necessary, all in an effort to make sure things go smoothly. In production talk, this means he is directly involved in the hiring process of the creatives, such as directors and writers, and to some degree, the actors. He is involved in the creation and the discussion of the stories with these creatives, and he consults on every script that is made. He'll sometimes visit the set during production to see how things are tracking, and he plays a big part in the editing room, helping to get the film or show over the line whilst maintaining a high standard of quality, a standard that has significantly dropped in recent years. Essentially, Feige is everywhere, in everything. The responsibility is fully on his shoulders, and it's all this control and power that has resulted in Feige being so loved and respected for his creation of the MCU. Everyone knew that he was the man behind the scenes building every project from the ground up, giving us so many fantastic character and story moments. The audience knew, at the end of the day, that we had Feige to thank for what we were witnessing. So then, with Feige still being in charge, why has the tide turned so drastically? He's still in control and still has the same amount of power and responsibility. Yet I don't even think 3 good projects have come out of the multiverse saga. As the quality of the content continues to rapidly decline, I can't help but ask,
What's he up to, man? What's he doing?
As we all know, the MCU is crumbling in Feige's hands, and the catalyst for this decline becomes all the more apparent when investigating his employment choices during his reign at Marvel Studios. If we take it all the way back to the first Iron Man film, for example, Kevin Feige hired Jon Favreau to direct, and a team of screenwriters which included Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby. Prior to Iron Man, Jon Favreau had most notably directed hit comedy Elf, both a commercial and critical success, as well as a film called Maid and Zathura. It's not the finest resume, and as of late, Favreau has proven to be a bit of a fraud himself, but the film was strengthened by the writing duo of Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby, screenwriters for the critically acclaimed Children of Men. Once again, Iron Man 1 wasn't perfect, and its success may have been pure fluke. A film carried by RDJ's charisma and screen presence. But regardless, Feige put the right people in the right seats. He hired capable talent who had proven themselves before, which ended up being a recipe for success and gave the MCU the kickstart it needed. To then further push the universe forward, Feige would go on to make some fantastic hiring choices. Joss Whedon was hired to write and direct Avengers 1 and 2 after previously being involved in both a writing and directing capacity on a plethora of different productions, most notably Toy Story, The Office, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely were hired to write all 3 Captain America films, Infinity War and Endgame, after having previously written the Narnia trilogy of films. The Russo brothers were hired to direct Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame after having previously directed some of the fan-favourite episodes on the hit show Community. James Gunn was hired to write and direct the Guardians films after previously writing for Dawn of the Dead and the Scooby-Doo films, as well as directing and writing Super and Slither. Kenneth Branagh was hired to direct Thor, who boasts an abundant filmography, directing many a film of Shakespearean background suitable for someone helming a character like that of Thor. And finally, Edgar Wright was involved with Ant-Man after previously writing and directing the Cornetto trilogy, as well as Scott Pilgrim. There was clearly an intent to hire capable creatives who had vision, distinct styles, and writing prowess that would translate to effective and engaging storytelling. And it did. Audiences bought into what Feige was building, becoming invested in not only the interlocking stories that brought the MCU together, but the wide range of characters within these stories, some more notable than others. Now, I must point out that it has been revealed that this saga wasn't actually as well planned out as once thought, with cameos like that of Nick Fury at the end of Iron Man and Thanos in the Avengers being nothing more than fan service, with no real plans to delve any deeper into these potential plot lines. However, as time went on, it was clear that Kevin Feige had some sort of through line, some sort of plan for how this saga could and would play out. There was clearly a rough blueprint that Feige had in his head, and which he made sure each individual production stuck to. Now, it might not have been beat by beat, but as we've seen, the story that we got was consistent and led on from film to film without contradicting itself, for the most part. Something that has been completely abandoned in recent times. Speaking of which, let's dive a little deeper into Phase 4 and Phase 5 of the MCU, otherwise known as the Multiverse Saga. With Iron Man kickstarting Phase 1 and the Infinity War saga, what better way to start Phase 4 and the multiverse saga than with WandaVision, the first of many Disney Plus shows that would bring in a new wave of utter dogshit content for us all to indulge in. Now, whilst Iron Man was directed by Jon Favreau, WandaVision was helmed by Jack Schaefer, who, you may ask? Well, none other than the writer of the absolutely phenomenal, critically acclaimed masterpiece, Olaf's Frozen Adventure. And that's not even the worst of it. For instance, Jeff Loveness was hired to write Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, having previously been credited as a writer on Jimmy Kimmel and a handful of Rick and Morty episodes, varying in quality. Michael Waldron was hired to write Season 1 of Loki and then Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, after having written only one episode of Rick and Morty. Given full control of two of the most significant stories for the MCU moving forward, with next to no experience. Jessica Gao was hired as the head writer for She-Hulk after previously writing on the high fructose adventures of Annoying Orange. Destin Daniel Cretton was hired to write and direct Shang-Chi after previously working on a handful of forgettable films. Jeremy Slater was hired as the head writer for Moon Knight after previously writing Fantastic and Death Note, two universally loved pieces of content. And finally, Ali Salim was hired to direct Secret Invasion, boasting a 20-year career in the industry with absolutely nothing noteworthy on his resume. Credit where credit's due, Feige hasn't hired complete frauds for all of the projects released in the multiverse saga. For example, Sam Raimi was brought on to direct Multiverse of Madness, and this was a great decision. What wasn't a great decision was having the likes of Michael Waldron writing the script, a decision that ultimately resulted in the film being a complete dumpster fire. Bringing Raimi on was also a result of losing the writer and director of the first Doctor Strange movie over creative differences. Because if I do recall correctly, this movie was supposed to be a horror film of sorts.
But when I came and talked to Kevin about doing a sequel, I said I don't want to do just another sequel to do a sequel. If I'm going to do it, it has to go into the territory that drew me into the Doctor Strange comics in the first place, which is how they dipped into the gothic and the horror and the horrific, and we're gonna make the first scary MCU film.
And that's definitely what we got. Another hiring choice that looked great on paper was that of Academy Award winner Chloe Zhao, who was brought on to write and direct The Eternals. Her filmography at that point consisted of two fairly well-received films, and she was in the process of making Nomadland, a film that would go on to win Best Picture and Best Director at the Academy Awards. Clearly, she was a talented filmmaker. However, her previous films focused on fairly low-level, down-to-earth stories, something a group of characters like that of the Eternals would struggle to be. There is a clear tonal disparity between her first few projects and what you'd expect from a superhero film. That's not to say her style couldn't work, but it didn't, and hence another flop was born. And then finally, Marion Dale was brought on as the showrunner and head writer for Echo. Having previously worked as a writer on Better Call Saul, a top-of-the-line show with fantastic character and story writing, it was looking promising. But once again, Marvel had another stinker on its hands. It goes without saying that a large portion of the blame can be pointed at the writers and directors of these disastrous pieces of content that quite obviously didn't have the experience or competence to effectively handle any of these new projects and deliver something the fans could get behind. The part they've played in the MCU's downfall is apparent, and based off their previous work, they should have never been hired in the first place. However, it may not entirely be their fault. In fact, after doing some investigating into Feige's filmmaking process, it's no surprise that the MCU is completely fucked. Feige tells all in this Q&A session he did at the New York Film Academy back in December of 2019, right off the back of the Infinity Saga. In this, he outlines different stages of the production process and how they at Marvel Studios go about tackling different complications along the way. So let's take a little look. In the interview, he talks about the early stages of production.
We choose a movie we're going to make, we choose the date we're going to release it, and then come hell or high water, we're going to make it and we're going to make it great.
You still have to get a good script though, and that's one of the hardest things.
Feige should have hired this woman on the spot, because she is bang on the money. You need a good story that's well fleshed out and thoroughly drafted. An idea is naturally a good starting point, but if you've got nothing other than that, and you decide that no matter what, it's going to be made, you're setting yourself up to fail.
It is, but it also, we never stop. So we work on the script during production. We work on the script in post.
Wait, what?
We work on the script in post.
You what?
In post.
Right. So you're working on the script when the movie's already been filmed?
You're a donut! You're so stupid!
So what you need are the pieces and the concepts, and yes, the script. And we've gone into production on movies that have had great scripts and still needed a lot of work. We've gone into production on movies that had solid structures and really great scenes, but we had to keep figuring it out. And as you say, you know, keep making the plane as it's going down the runway.
This is absolutely crazy, but with the content we've been getting, it makes so much sense. At times, it really does seem like they're just splicing random ideas for scenes together and calling it a movie.
It's easy to stop and it's easy to settle, and we don't do that. Sometimes frustratingly late in the process.
So Feige, would you consider She-Hulk an example of where you refuse to settle for less? Moon Knight? Secret Invasion? Maybe Quantumania?
But reshoots was a bad word. Oh, this movie's in reshoots, there must be a problem. Reshoots are key to our films, starting with Iron Man 1. Because it's great, and we always say, you know, we're smart filmmakers at Marvel, but we're not, you know, we're not geniuses, and the best way to give notes on a movie is to watch the movie. So we make the movie and then watch it and go, oh yeah, no, that's not right. That doesn't work. And have a system now that can be quite precise and quite efficient.
Now this is perhaps one of the most interesting things he says. I don't entirely disagree with the fact that reshoots can't be helpful, because they obviously can help refine a film, polishing certain moments that haven't tested well in early screenings. That sometimes is necessary. But you can give notes on a movie by giving notes on the script prior to filming the movie, which I guarantee rarely happens. Anyway, he hasn't finished, so let's hear what else he has to say.
When we schedule our films, we schedule the production period, and then we schedule the additional photography period.
So in other words, you schedule reshoots as you anticipate the project being heavily flawed and needing a lot of work. Couldn't this all be avoided if you just spent time honing your script before starting production?
People don't ask us anymore because they know it's the system, but they would go, oh, what will you be reshooting then? And we go, we don't know. If we knew, we wouldn't do it. Yeah. But we know there'll be something.
That might be the most damning thing Feige says in this interview. We know there's going to be something. We know the content we're going to produce is absolute dog shit, and so we're going to try and fix it down the line, no matter how late that'll be and how many visual effects companies will fuck over. How difficult is it to write a competent script, draft and redraft it, have other competent writers look over it, and then go into production once it's been refined? And if there's a couple little tweaks you'd like to make, then go ahead and do a few reshoots if necessary. But planning for it and being okay with always needing extensive reshoots is a recipe for disaster. An extensive pre-production stage goes a long way, and James Gunn is the epitome of this notion, writing complete scripts and storyboarding every scene in Guardians of the Galaxy 3 not only led to the only commercial success for the MCU in 2023, but it meant James Gunn only needed 2 days of reshoots to polish his film. In comparison, the Marvels needed 4 weeks of reshoots, and that still wasn't enough to save it. As I mentioned, the process is fucked, and all it really comes down to is just spending more time undergoing thorough preparation prior to production, rather than anticipating reshoots upon reshoots and writing scripts as you go. It was recently revealed in a book titled MCU: The Reign of Marvel Studios that WandaVision didn't even have an ending. It was reported that all the episodes were mapped out except for the finale, which was just represented as a massive question mark on a whiteboard. And that translated perfectly to the way the episode played out. How can you create a show, send it to production with millions of dollars at stake, and not know how it ends? It blows my mind that Marvel has managed to get away with this for so many years, and Feige has just been reaping the rewards and getting all the accolades in the process. But we're not quite done with the interview yet, as he also reveals his involvement within the editing room.
My favorite place to solve problems is the cutting room. You know, a movie starts with 4 or 5 of us around a table talking about what it should be, then it expands to hundreds, thousands, and then it comes back down to 5 or 6 people in a cutting room.
So, based on this statement, Feige has sat down in the editing room for She-Hulk Episode 3, seen She-Hulk throwing it back and gone, yep, we've cooked here. Another ridiculous quote from this interview centers around the decision-making process for character moments. For context in this clip, he is specifically talking about Peggy and Cap's ending in Endgame.
And when you have an anchor of an idea like that, and when you're like, we think this is the perfect ending, a lot of the movie can be in shambles, and you're feeling okay because it's worth working on because you know where you're headed.
See, now that's some bullshit.
It's alright guys, the movie can be in shambles, but it doesn't matter because Steve gets to go back and shag Peggy for the one time. I mean, he's totally right. Endgame was an absolute shambles. But how can he be so confident they made the right decision with Cap, ending his story in a manner that has divided the fanbase ever since? I almost get the impression this was the first idea that came to mind in the writer's room, and that no other options were even explored. To top it all off, Feige delves into his hiring process for creatives and how they select their talent.
Do something that gets on our radar, and it doesn't have to be a big giant movie. It can be a clever show, as in the case of the Russos. Do something that showcases who you are and the potential of what you can do.
So what was it that Michael Waldron showcased? What potential did you see in him, Feige? That one Rick and Morty episode he wrote must have been an absolute masterpiece to give him full control of Loki and Doctor Strange. Because why else would you do something like that?
I promise you this will make sense.
Before going any further, it's absolutely worth noting that this interview took place after the Infinity Saga and around the time the Multiverse Saga was kicking off. Meaning, this backwards process was in place even during the glory days of the MCU, and, for the most part, was working. As Feige mentions, accounting for reshoots was an important part of the filmmaking process from day one, back when the first Iron Man was in production, and I guess having incomplete scripts whilst undergoing filming has also been prevalent from the beginning. This would explain some of the sloppier entries in the Infinity Saga. So the process hasn't changed, but the end product has become significantly worse. And what I think it comes down to, how it comes full circle, is Feige's hiring choices. Once upon a time, he would put competent writers and directors in charge of these projects that may not have had completed scripts when entering production, that could have had endings surrounded by question marks. But due to their expertise and experience, they were capable of rescuing scripts, tying up loose ends whilst maintaining consistency, and writing character arcs with substance and nuance. Nowadays, we have complete degenerates with no talent helming these high-budget productions. They're not capable of saving scripts or writing engaging characters with compelling stories. Millions of dollars put in the hands of writers and directors who simply don't have a clue. Having incomplete, nonsensical scripts and going in with an attitude of just figuring it out as we go along is never going to work effectively, especially if you're not employing the right people. There's a reason James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy 3 was the most successful film commercially and critically in an otherwise dire time for superhero films. Because that man is prepared. He doesn't go to set with a partially complete script. He's not writing it as they're filming. From day one, he knows what film he's making, how he wants it to look, how it ends, and he reaps the rewards in the long run. But now he's gone to the opposition. Having delved deep into this fiasco, it's clear that Feige's process is a complete and utter mess. It's honestly a miracle that it was even sustainable in the first place and led to monumental success during the Infinity Saga. But it's becoming all the more obvious that those days are gone. Feige has well and truly dropped the ball. If he doesn't change his process, a process he seems to be so proud of, then there's well and truly no way back. And the biggest shame of all is that it's such an easy fix. Just be prepared.
No shit.
Stop greenlighting projects with no real plan and stop putting idiots in charge. Until then, there won't be a redemption arc for Feige or Marvel, and the MCU will just continue to slip into misery and irrelevance.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Now I know what you're probably thinking. How can you say it's Feige's fault when Disney clearly spread him too thin? It's obvious Disney is responsible for the downfall of the MCU, not Feige. He can't feasibly oversee all these projects, can he? And we know he makes good content. Just look at the Infinity Saga. It can't possibly be his fault. Every man and his dog points the finger at Disney, holding them accountable for the lack of quality content and oversaturation of the superhero genre. And to be honest, I can't really argue with the logic. With the introduction of Disney Plus to the streaming market in 2019, Marvel didn't have much choice. To ensure Disney Plus was able to keep up with the competition, it needed content, a continuous stream of content. And what better franchise to expand than Marvel? Right off the back of the incredibly successful Infinity Saga, MCU fans were desperate to know where the story could possibly go next, and Disney licked their lips at the opportunity that presented itself. If only we could have known then what would become of the MCU. With so many enticing projects announced and set to be released in the near future, things looked promising, and the fans were ecstatic. It was only later on that we would learn Feige was pressured into announcing projects that had barely gotten off the ground. I mean, Fantastic Four is only now just getting started, yet it was announced almost 5 years ago. So much content promised, and so little time to deliver. Going from roughly 2 to 3 films per year from 2013 onwards, to 4 films and 4 live-action shows in 2021 alone, it was never going to work. From that point onwards, Feige has definitely been spread thin. Unable to keep on top of the sheer amount of content coming out of Marvel Studios, junior executives have been called upon to oversee the Disney Plus shows, with Feige no longer able to have his finger in every pie. As the box office numbers rapidly decline and the fanbase gives up on their once beloved franchise, the repercussions of Disney's greed have become abundantly clear. But at the end of the day, it's Feige's responsibility. He's the man in charge, so it's on him to deliver, no matter how tough the situation is. No matter how stretched thin he becomes, it's on him to make it work. Now don't get me wrong, Disney are partially responsible for the obliteration of the MCU, and definitely made Feige's job 100 times harder than it needed to be. Clearly he's been unable to administer as much control as he would like, that much is evident. But I still think he's absolutely shat the bed, for one main reason: his process, and how it simply wasn't equipped to handle Disney's demand for content. As I've mentioned, the fact that his process worked in the first place baffles me. Entering production completely underprepared, scheduling weeks of reshoots before production even begins because you know it's going to be a disaster, figuring out the movie as it's being made. The fact that we managed to get something competent is purely down to the creatives put in charge, who were capable of adapting on the fly or were just prepared in the first place and didn't buy into Feige's philosophy. What Feige needed to realize when Disney came knocking on his door was that the process needed to change. If Disney was demanding 3 times the amount of content per year, flying by the seat of our pants wasn't going to cut it. Especially not if the people we were going to put in charge were incredibly inexperienced. Creatives of a similar caliber to those hired in the early days needed to be sought after, not the talentless frauds we got, who should have never even been considered. Another thing that Feige needed to do was better map out this saga. He got away with not having the most detailed roadmap for the Infinity Saga, but the overarching storyline was fairly straightforward, which helped keep all the films consistent with one another. Now we have this ever-growing mess with the multiverse saga, a handful of films and Disney Plus shows that share almost zero consistency. We've had the multiverse explored in Loki, Spider-Man No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, and Quantumania, but the rules are constantly changing, with every writer and director just going ahead and doing their own thing. It's unclear what the team at Marvel are even trying to accomplish at this point, with the storytelling becoming all the more convoluted and so difficult to follow. All this is made so much worse by the fact that Feige and Marvel Studios truly believe that the content they have been producing, like that of Quantumania, has been of a high quality. They really thought they were cooking, and were shocked at fans' reactions. Knowing that Disney wanted significantly more content, for his own sake and the sake of the company, Feige needed to better plan this saga, especially when trying to implement a much more complex story that centers around a multiverse plotline. Some groundwork needed to be laid, with multiversal rules discussed and a heavy focus on consistency and continuity throughout each and every project. Projects that he should have ensured were thoroughly planned out with completed scripts prior to the commencement of production, not during, not in post. They needed to be done and dusted from the moment the crew and the actors walked on set for the first time. And that's something I'm yet to address. How are some of these actors meant to deliver a performance when in some cases, like that of Elizabeth Olsen in WandaVision, they don't even know how the story or their character arc ends? To be honest, it's pretty damn sad that any of this needs to be said. Thorough preparation for films with whopping budgets should just be common practice. What's even more concerning is that Feige hasn't woken up to the fact that his process doesn't work anymore. Regardless of being in over his head or stretched thin, it's Feige's job to make it work and adapt to an otherwise dire situation. But the only thing he's changed about his process is the quality of the creatives he's hired, who are impressively awful at their jobs. All of this information that's come to light has really made me think that, all along, Feige may have truly just been a fraud who got lucky. In the early days, was he simply carried by those he hired, passionate creatives who actually had a clue what they were doing? Is that really what it comes down to, that Feige isn't as competent as we all thought? Because if he was, would the MCU really be in the state that it's in? If he was the messiah of comic book films, would we really be where we are today? I just don't think so. Even with Disney's interference, a competent individual makes it work, and Feige just hasn't been capable of doing that. And I'm not saying that every film or show has to be 10 out of 10 perfect. Hell, I'll take a 6 out of 10 at this point. To have any chance at redemption, we need characters to root for and captivating stories that help foster their growth. But I think the damage has been done. The fanbase is on its last legs, the future is looking bleak, and all this leaves me begging the question: it saddens me to say it, but I do believe that the MCU has had its day. With one box office flop after another and no end in sight, it's time to pull in the reins and dial back how much content is being made. Once upon a time, I would have been really disappointed if that were the case, but it has truly gotten to the point where too much damage has been done, and the magic of the MCU is gone. Superhero fatigue is often used to explain why these projects are failing and the genre is dying, but I think it comes down to both a lack of quality and a lack of care in the projects being made. Executives are slowly starting to realize that it isn't 2018 anymore. You can't just shit out a bang average film and make a cool billion. Audiences have become wise to the fact that most of these films are garbage, and studios have to start pivoting. To get through this rough patch, a significant overhaul needs to take place. Make less content, but actually make it good. Focus on writing compelling characters that audiences can buy back into, competent villains with clear motivations, and consistent stories that don't contradict one another. James Gunn showed that there is still a lingering interest in superhero films thanks to Guardians 3, but that was honestly a diamond in the rough, and with each stinker film or show that drops, the return to prominence becomes all the more unlikely. As Marvel takes a step back this year, with plans to only release one film, this gives audiences a much needed break from the overwhelming amount of dry content being put out, which could potentially work in Marvel's favour. This is probably more as a result of the strikes than a decision by Feige or other executives, so I'm not giving the man any credit in that regard. With that being said, there's still an ounce of hope. It seems both Disney and Marvel Studios have finally become aware of the damage they have caused and are trying to pivot drastically. Deadpool and Wolverine comes out soon, and it does look promising, but with reshoots taking place in May, 2 months before the film's release, that does make me slightly worried. An Agatha show is also on the way this year.
Yes! Hell yeah! Hey, come on, baby! Come on! Yes! Come on!
And then we have the many rumblings about Daredevil Born Again undergoing a huge creative overhaul, with writers being fired, episodes being scrapped, and fan favourites being brought back. That being said, it all just sounds like a desperate attempt to save face, and I don't really have high hopes. Next year we have Captain America Brave New World to look forward to, with reshoots rumoured to begin in May and last all the way up until August.
What the fuck?
A new Fantastic Four is also in the works, with a script from the writer of Terminator Dark Fate and being helmed by the director of WandaVision, Matt Shakman, who, to be fair, has directed a shitload of TV, but only one feature film. With production starting this year, I'm sure it's going to be great.
I'm so excited!
There's some rumours floating around about the next Spider-Man film, with Sony wanting it to be another multiverse debacle, but Feige and Tom Holland wanting a more street-level story. That definitely doesn't sound like another mess inbound. On the plus side, sequels to The Eternals, Ant-Man, and Captain Marvel have been completely thrown out the window.
It's about damn time.
And then of course we have the next Avengers film somewhere on the horizon, which was Kang Dynasty, but isn't anymore. This provides Feige the perfect opportunity to correct course and explore a different overarching plotline with a villain that makes sense. Pivoting away from that whole convoluted shitstorm and focusing on something a bit simpler will only work in Feige's favour. But with the GOAT Michael Waldron set to write, maybe not.
What are you fucking doing?
Then there's obviously the cast of characters left, with most of the fan favourites either departing after the Infinity Saga, being completely ruined by incompetent writing and absurd plots, or receiving a well-deserved ending. Having no redeeming characters that make these movies or shows worth seeing may be the hardest problem of all to fix. And unfortunately, there's talks of bringing back some of the most beloved characters for a project like Secret Wars, but that would just be lame and another pathetic attempt to keep fans on board. Sadly, they would much rather do that than fix the current roster of characters. Making the audience care again will be an almost insurmountable feat, with the majority of the fanbase that existed at the peak of the MCU no longer showing up. There is, however, still a minutia of hope, and Feige will be betting the house on some of these upcoming projects, even with the odds completely against him. That being said, every decision being made in an effort to hold on to an audience that almost doesn't exist anymore just reeks of desperation. Once upon a time, Feige had my trust. He had everyone's trust. Projects were exciting, and they almost always offered something that made them worth seeing, whether that be the characters, the stories, the relationships, the villains, or the heart. We knew that whatever Feige was signing off on had some source, but not anymore. The trust is completely gone, and the MCU is in such a dire state that I don't see a world in which he earns it back. It goes without saying that Feige has completely fumbled the bag, from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows, with little to no hope of returning to prominence. No one could have predicted such a fall-off, not even Feige himself. But deep down, I think he knew, from the moment Endgame released, that their time was up. They had well and truly peaked, and things were never, ever going to be the same again.
I always say no RDJ, no MCU.